Melissa, thank you for coming on the Responsible Supply Chain Show. It's good to see you.
I'm excited to be here. I am one of your listeners, so when you asked to be a guest, I was flattered. So thanks for having me.
Wow, it's always been my dream to hear that. You hear that on podcasts, and here it is. I'm done. I can quit. Where am I finding you today?
I'm at my home office in Austin, Texas.
I think that's number 3 for me. I think it's number 3 for me in places I'd be okay with living. I love it, except in July. Is that when
Yeah.
the bats? When do the bats come out of the bridge?
July. That? They're pretty active in the summertime. Yeah.
Yeah. See,
But
I didn't know that, and I was coming up Congress one day to go eat something downtown, and everyone was standing around, and nobody warned me what was about to happen. And listeners, if you've never been to Austin in July, what's that bridge? Well, we should warn everyone.
It's the Congress Avenue Bridge, which most people
Bridge in July around sunset, right?
Yes,
Right
around sunset, you'll see the crowd gathering. So know that the bats
gathering. Beware, you're going to see something just biblical. It's next level. All right, we're not here to talk about bats or bridges. We're here to talk about responsible sourcing. So this is just a chance for our listeners to learn from what I understand, one of the best in the business. I want to hear a little bit about kind of a little quick overview of your career, very quickly. I mean, like 2 minutes, like leading up to your current role. I know roles change quickly. Your current role as supply chain responsibility manager at AMD. Is that your current role? Is it bigger?
I'm the senior manager now, but the task is still the task is still.
Let's get that. Let's get that in there.
Senior manager. Yeah.
Good. Well, let's talk about how you got here.
Yeah. No, I'm happy to. So my first career out of college was actually in cultural exchange. So I was helping students come to the U.S. on a variety of different programs, actually run through the State Department, whether they were going to be an au pair, so a live-in nanny for a year or two, or a high school student who wanted to study here, or a college student who wanted to, work at a Great America over the summer, and essentially get to experience America, practice or perfect their English and build a resume and have some fun. That actually led me to being able to travel abroad. And because I was the one working with our business partners who were recruiting those students. And what that did for me was give me a whole eye opener into, the developing world and what globalization was doing. I mean, this was back in 2007, 8, 9 were some of my earlier trips, down to Brazil, Colombia, really a lot in Latin America. And it was just an eye opener for me of just, I had lived in Europe, but, the developing world is a different ballgame. So I quit my job. I packed up my boxes from California, shipped them home to Chicago, and put myself on an airplane for about a year and a half, where I lived throughout Latin America. Started out teaching English in Santiago, Chile, and ultimately ended up in Cochabamba, Bolivia. And it was during that time that I was working with an NGO and working with farmers, and I was learning about quinoa, actually.
Quinoa.
And that was
little rice?
Not technically a rice, but yes, most people think it's healthier than rice. It's like a kettle pot, or I always say it wrong. But yeah, quinoa is ultimately what led me to where I am today, because I just became fascinated with supply chains. How does this little known crop that's essentially from the Andes, so Peru and Bolivia, how is it making its way into eventually like a McDonald's or every grocery store shelf, and what did it do to those people? Ultimately I wrote my master's thesis on the unintended consequences of, positives and negatives of entering into a global economy. And that really allowed me to career change into responsible sourcing.
Wait, do I need to worry about quinoa?
You don't need to worry about quinoa. I still have a special place in my heart for the Bolivian farmers who are protecting that, that's where it's from.
Okay.
There's
All right. Gosh, I
so
love
I'm
quinoa.
particular about the quinoa I buy, but in
Okay.
general, it's healthy and
We're going to
the
put some
what
notes
you
in
eat
the
it.
comments section where to buy quinoa. Okay, let's just make
Yeah,
sure we'll tell people where to buy quinoa. Okay.
sure. Yeah. Parlayed that into a company. I was back in San Francisco at this point where a lot of
Mm,
sustainability, was and still is kind of taking place. And there is a company called LaborLink that was
mm,
partially funded by Fairtrade USA.
yeah.
So they liked my fascination with quinoa over there and hired me
Yeah.
on to what I was doing was actually selling, trying to sell, we sold some worker surveys to
Yeah.
multinational corporations across tech and apparel and food and ag.
Yeah.
And the idea was and still is to bring worker voice into audits.
How old is or how mature is the role of responsible sourcing at AMD?
The role came up over a decade ago.
Okay.
So I'm not the first person to hold it.
Okay.
It did reside within corporate responsibility,
Yeah.
which sits in legal for a number of years. Actually, the person who created the role, many your listeners may know his name, Tim Moen,
Mm,
was the corporate responsibility director at
okay.
AMD. And this was during the Dodd-Frank era, with conflict minerals,
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
that good stuff. And so it was also around the time that AMD changed its business model and went fabless. So no longer manufacturing our own semiconductor chips, but spun that off into a different business
Yeah.
entirely, and took on the fabless model. And so there was a real need there then to monitor compliance to AMD's code of conduct for what was later our contract manufacturers. So
Okay. Okay, that's big. So, all right. So maybe you can give us a little bit of a day in the life of what a senior, let's be clear, senior responsible sourcing, as opposed to just a mere junior, a senior responsible sourcing manager. Like, give us like, what does a week look like? What are you doing?
the overall picture is supply chain due diligence, right? Which is now kind of referred to as human rights and environmental due diligence. And
Yeah.
there all of us kind of line up to the same international frameworks when we do this work,
Yeah.
whether it's UN guiding principles, for example, running a risk assessment on existing supply chain or new suppliers. So putting that into our third party database and looking at what's an inherent risk of this supplier based on what they're going to provide to us, what product, where are they based, what is the how is their workforce comprised? The next part of that process is looking at, okay, well, just because a supplier is risky doesn't mean, we would recommend not doing business with them. In fact, there are times more often than not where we need to do business with them. And so my role becomes even that much more important because you're saying, well, how do we mitigate? How is a supplier mitigating some of that risk? And then for the
Yeah.
risk that it's not, okay, let's talk to them about that and support them through that process.
Yeah.
So a lot of my day, which begins in the evening because a lot of our suppliers are based in Asia, is communicating with our suppliers, learning more about their programs. Maybe I've looked at an audit report during the day and I've seen that they need help in X, Y, and Z area. So supplier engagement is a big piece, one of my favorite pieces of the job. And then lots
Why?
of
Why?
internal
Why is
communication.
supplier engagement? Why do you love that?
I think it's where it ties into a bit of that international development piece of
Yeah.
working with a different business, a different culture. I think it's that question part of my brain where I'm like, there's a challenge here, and I want to dig into it, and then help them find
Yeah.
a solution.
Can I push into that a little bit?
Sure.
Um, Tell me if you think this is true. Is there, in the sourcing world, in the supply chain world, there seems to be a little bit of an us them line. Us being the buyers, them being,
Yes.
and I think that's entirely human. That's how we organize safety as human beings: is tribal, us, them. They're unsafe, we're safe. We do it right. They do it quite. There's just that's how humans organize. And I think that gets in the way
Yes.
sometimes of trust, especially to your point, someone who's you've never met, maybe in a place you've never been to, does things completely different. So we talk about risk, but I want to hear how you build trust
Yeah.
across without spending a lot of time with someone.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of trust, like really important trust. Like, so maybe you can tell me about how you bridge that us them divide by building trust.
It's a great question. I'm glad that we can talk about this because I think there are different approaches
Mm,
to supplier management. I even feel it sitting in the role I'm in, like where AMD sits in the supply chain. We have our customers, and so I can feel like I'm the them, and I'm getting pushed on. So that makes me. That's one reason where I think I'm just hyper mindful of that going into conversations that I don't want to drive the conversation that way. I also learned by living abroad was really taught me some invaluable skills.
mm,
You're vulnerable when you don't know that culture, you don't know the language, and you certainly don't want to be treated as that outsider. So, I bring that perspective of like, remember when the roles were reversed and I was the one that kind of didn't know anything or, couldn't communicate, like, how would I want to be treated? And then just trial and error. I did not always operate this way. Bringing a decade's worth of international business experience to this role, I think
oh,
also helped me
so helpful. Yeah, 100%.
because you're working across cultures, whether you're talking about, doesn't really matter the topic so much. I've had to learn that part of responsible sourcing and the industry procurement speak, but the way you speak to people.
We have not, we're so not
Yeah.
self-reflective in the supply chain responsibility space because our primary lingua franca is one-sided questions via questionnaires. If you think about it, it
Mhm,
is
mhm.
it's borderline imperialism where we
Yes.
just, this is our primary communication. We're going to ask you questions, you're going to answer, and it
And you
doesn't
better
really,
answer them in this set time frame or
yeah,
else.
or else you don't get else you don't make money, and I
Yeah.
mean, and it has huge consequences for your business, your life, your family. Like these are big, right?
Yeah.
And
Totally.
I agree. I think that there's a lot of room to, and I love what you're saying here. There's a lot of room to improve how to be human. After you've built trust, like what the soft diplomacy skills are you deploying that our listeners can learn from that is helping, assuming they've built trust with suppliers? How are you convincing people to do things that aren't in their top priorities?
I think you have to flip the narrative. The one of the things I caught when you said is, oh, this might not kind of help them be profitable. Your comment was along those lines, right? The narrative that I would counter to that and how I would pitch it to suppliers is that neither AMD nor the supplier will maintain our long-term business relationship with a customer could be at risk if we don't meet this particular goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sticking with the emissions reduction is a great one. There's a lot of really respectable companies who have put out really challenging goals, and they're sticking to them, and they're pushing the rest of the supply chain. So,
Yep.
Kudos to them, because then that means we then turn around and say to our suppliers, "Hey, this isn't actually enough.
Mm.
What more can you do?" And there's certainly difficult conversations, but the framing really always comes back to the end buyer is demanding this. And so this really is no longer a nice to have. Like, this is, we need you to do this. And so where can we negotiate? Maybe we negotiate on timeline. Maybe,
Okay.
sometimes there are, so this is the procurement side that has taught me, make that room for negotiation.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So because again, I'm not a sourcing professional. I know responsible sourcing and business and human rights. And so this is the constant internal learning that I'm like, all right, well, if you were to negotiate price this way, what chips would you hold back? So maybe what chips do I, hold back here, knowing there's going to be some leeway moving forward,
That's a
so
great tip. That bringing negotiating of timelines. And Because I think there's a, we hear this a lot of, well, does it have teeth? Like you can demand this stuff, but like at the end of the day, if you really need it and the supplier knows that, they don't, and it's not a priority. But what you're saying is, if you want to maintain what every business wants is long-term revenue, like revenue that they can count on over the long term. And that, it sounds like that's what you're kind of holding over the barrel. Like, if we want to have a long-term relationship, this is the direction we need to go. And we're not negotiating an if, we're negotiating a when you hit these goals.
Correct.
Am I hearing you correctly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
That sounds reasonable. It sounds
Makes
reasonable.
it sound a little more reasonable, right? You don't have to give it to me right now or yesterday, but you are going to give it to me. So let's talk about when it makes it less painless for you.
Yeah. And does it ever come up in the conversation of like, and by the way, we're not the only ones asking for this. You've got other customers that want that. This isn't a one-off.
Exactly.
Like, reducing your emissions literally is a bee in every one of your buyers' bonnets.
Yes. Yeah. Hugely important influencing factor. Yeah. And there are times where we'll ask for something and we'll say, you know what? They'll say, no one else is asking. And I'll say, not yet. We might be the first, but someone else is going to come. So let us help you prepare for that second ask.
Okay. So you've given everyone some tips on how, soft diplomacy skills for the suppliers. You've also have to deploy maybe soft and or hard diplomacy internally inside the business to be able to drive decisions with the business, I'm assuming. Who do you bring information to? Is it supply chain, procurement, legal? Like where do you bring intelligence back to the business after you've collected and driven and created some kind of substantive change with your suppliers? Where is it showing up in the business?
All the departments that you mentioned, but I'll start with, I think, a really important one, which is the sourcing manager. Okay. Like that person who holds that day-to-day relationship with the supplier. Really try and include them on communications and keep them in the loop. And, because they hopefully become an extension of kind of the responsible sourcing team, because there's more of them than there are of our small and mighty team. So they are one of making sure they understand kind of what came back. Let's just say there's a non-conformance and then we need to go back and that doesn't meet our requirements, so we're going back to the supplier. I like that person to know why. I'm going to give a little bit of like the importance of why behind it.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit the wood behind the arrow? Like what empiricism do you have to bring when you're talking about supplier risk? Like what do sourcing managers truly need to hear? Like what's the top line information that they need to know?
What are their top risks, which we've narrowed down in two ways. I mean, one, it's like the corporate wide, and it's led by corporate responsibility, a double materiality analysis. So that is driving our priorities for the next 3 to 5 years. Those are done on a particular cadence, and if there's a big change to your business. And that incorporates multiple stakeholders, including internal executives and our customers. And so what the top things that are top of mind in our space right now, and you can read more about it in our corporate responsibility report, but it is migrant workers who oftentimes are paying heavy recruitment fees to work in factories, particularly in South and Southeast Asia. And then the amount of emissions that the semiconductor supply chain, particularly the wafer fabs, contributes to global warming. But those are, so our supply chain, our sourcing manager team hears a lot about those two topics. So we need people to make our products, and they're going to come from a variety of places. And in order for our products to make it to the market, or, the components that go into it, our customer is going to bring across the border, it can't have a risk of forced labor in it. So again, in order to do long-term business, we need to have an ethical recruitment supply chain to maintain literally our goods being able to cross borders into the US. And then, the EU has a forced labor import ban that's coming into effect soon. So this is where it helps to have, not just customer, but also policy and regulation that supports.
Yeah. And these are big. I don't think people understand how big these laws are and how far they reach. They just sound like an import ban, like, oh, we just got to create the correct customs declaration. It's thing to do with that. It's everything to do with the work that you do and traceability and all that. And I think that is, and you're tracing a behavior, not an emission.
Yes.
How do you convince a sourcing manager or the CFO or whatever it is that, like, look, this is how we're managing these things. This is how we're moving it forward. This is how we as a business feel like we're putting our best foot forward on these requirements that are, pretty extensive.
I think part of it is bringing in the other teams, so at global trade compliance, we have a close relationship, with them. So it's multiple departments, and then you have legal. So you have multiple departments and department heads talking about the issues at an executive level. Now, it might not be part of their daily conversation, but because if assuming you've already built the program in place, the processes in place from when these conversations are going to happen at a certain cadence with executives all the way up to the board level. So, you need to be prepared that you're going to have a report out on this and they're going to want to listen to you at that time, to the day to day, So I don't know that I had to do too much convincing for the sourcing managers to incorporate a human right risk in their screening of suppliers. We embedded that into the process. So we made it easy for them. So we tagged on to the behavior that's already there, which is, hey, when we're bringing on a new supplier, I know what checklist to go to. And then one day, this was incorporated in that. And that, to get that in there, that's part of the pitch, is to say, we can make this easy for your team. Because you're right, it's all about changing behavior and collaboration to produce them.
Yeah, you're right. It's impossible to do this without internal and external collaboration with suppliers. I can't. Let me ask you this. Maybe there's something that I get the sense that we might be over-indexing on, that we might need to be, the collective we might need to be thinking a little bit more about. We check suppliers as they're coming in, but that's on whatever day they get onboarded. Risk has a way of showing up whenever it wants to in a supply chain. It doesn't just show up the day that someone's onboarded. How does monitoring of suppliers show up for companies? And you don't have to talk about it yours, but how is it, specifically, but, from a role like yours, where does supply risk monitoring, not just risk checking, but risk monitoring fall in?
Some new tools have helped, starting this almost 10 years ago. Things like supply chain mapping tools, weren't there yet. And then now you have, everything has its limitations, but like, at least, you can look at more, not just your tier ones, but kind of get in your tier twos, maybe, tier threes, as much as your suppliers are willing to divulge, really. It's kind of how deep.
I might know a thing or two about that.
Yes. I think you've got part of it solution to that. But so let's say we know the suppliers, right? Now there's the screening tools. That's, hey, they popped up in the news. So media alerts, or even, again, coming back to my beginnings in responsible sourcing, hearing from the workers themselves. It is really not that hard to figure out whose product you're making. I mean, come on, our logos are on it. And, dormitories, or wherever folks are living, they've got a smartphone these days, or at least access to an internet or access, luckily, to an NGO and a support system who can say, hey, I can help you figure out that website and how to report. So there are tools that, I thought workers wouldn't use that might actually be too kind of hidden for them to find. And that is not the case at all. We've had workers calling into what would be more of like a corporate ethics line, but that can certainly take. It's meant really for any stakeholder to provide us feedback, things like that. But it's a question that, I'd love to crowdsource answers to. I think there's probably still tools that maybe I'm not aware of or using, but it's definitely top of mind and something that can kind of keep you up at night of like, oh, what's the risk I don't know about? But you have to balance that too with, is the company ready for you to reveal, to know that, because then you have to act. And that's part of the conversation internally too, of it is better off to know than to not know. So
yeah, you have to get there, and you have to, and I agree, organizations, because that's what we do. Like, and you're going to look at bright red warning signs on a dashboard and go, oh my God, what am I, it's like 6 tiers up. I got this, that, and like, yeah, it's real. It's like, it's evidence-based. This is where your supply chain goes. It's real. But what it does, I think, for roles like yours is it puts more intelligence, puts more tools in the hands. I think that the new tools that are coming beyond questionnaires, it almost like increases the workspace of what can be done. And I think that sometimes people get really stuck with just the work, this is how we do it. And when you bring new intelligence, part of what I try to encourage people with is, it's not that everything is actionable. It's just kind of informs and helps you. And it gives you just a different look at what risk looks like. And not everything needs to be acted on. The majority of this information, what I'm finding, should be shared with the supplier. And we're starting to see that's actually, look, supplier, there's some things happening that you're not aware of. That's revolutionary to like go, and by the way, anyone can find this information, right? It's not just us as a buyer. Anyone can find it. I think that we're seeing that the companies have to get ready to be able to absorb this information in their own way. What do you feel like are the primary obstacles to success in a role like this? Like, what gets in the way? What's the thing where you go, oh, that again? And it shouldn't be like a person.
Right. Don't name names.
No, don't name names or titles.
Yeah. I'm just following the thread we're talking about visibility. I think, and sometimes actually it's overwhelming as a practitioner, the amount of tools that are actually out there saying, hey, we can solve this for you. And what we're really looking for is, no, this is actually in your supply chain, not like, hey, it might be, but like this actually is, because there are so many hours in a day that you do want the data to be actionable. I think I'll call it now a perceived resistance to change. It feels like if a responsible sourcing or any, wear your compliance hat, you walk in to the business unit, you walk into that, different department, and I'm like, oh no, please don't sigh that, Melissa has showed up. I'm constantly like, no, I got to bring, I'm the one who's going to help enable business, not like put a blocker in front of you. But there is that, whether certain people are definitely resistant to change, others, it might just be, they just don't have the time. And so how do you make it, easy for them? So getting over that, whether it's actually in the person's mind and needing to kind of win them over, or flipping it in your own head yourself and saying, they might actually not be resistant. I don't need to go in, with my boxing gloves on. I just need to show them, hey, here's 2 options of what we could do.
Yep.
Which one do you want? and be the problem solver, and
There's that soft diplomacy again.
Soft diplomacy.
You've built it up.
Yeah.
So, what's a win look like? Like, what's, when you shut your laptop at the end of the day and go, oh, that was awesome. What does that look like? Give me an example.
So I think hearing from the suppliers, hey, if they want to tell me what their, score is on a benchmark or an audit or whatever, and they just unsolicited, they're like, hey, I want to share this with you, I'm like, wow, that's great, and occasionally they might say, hey, thanks for your support along the way, when I may have thought I just sent, a few good documents or gave them an e-learning or something, but it stuck for them, and there is evidence of that. So who doesn't like to get a thank you?
Especially when you feel like you're just on people all the time to get a thank you. That's awesome. Well, just wrapping up, can you give one piece for anyone who's coming into this space, which, let's be clear, you're a senior supply chain. So you must have some wisdom to share with those who are coming into this space.
I would say, remember your passion. I think people, or speaking from my own experience, I came in with a passion of learning, like, how the heck do supply chains even work? Which I'm still kind of trying to figure out every day. Keep that curiosity, and then the passion to help. And it may help the world or help someone, across the globe, have a better day, at work. So I may not have, solved someone's issue, but I may have heard about it. And because it got to the responsible sourcing department, there's at least hope that it can be acted on. And so that kind of validates the work. It keeps you going. Yes, what needs to happen is a big structural change around really helping that person and those people in that factory or in that region. But thinking about that little win of, at least it got to the right person or department who can try. And, that's what we're here for. And so you can't lose that. Otherwise, you're going to get lost in the news of the day and the overwhelmingness of it all. And it's certainly, I do that. But I'm honing in on your last question there about those small wins, because I think you really do have to keep those in mind to keep going. And what can be some grim conversations where you talk about forced labor and, global warming on a daily, if not, hourly basis.
Yeah.
So,
well, I'm so glad you are there. AMD is richer for having you. The world is richer for having you in the position you are in. Congrats on all the success in your role and the win that's behind your company right now. Thank you for taking time with everything that's going on with you guys, that you would take time and come on and talk about this. It's just a testimony to who you are. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.